Hello and good evening. It was one of the worst atrocities in the bloodiest year of the Troubles. 9 people, Protestants and Catholics, were killed and 30 others injured when 3 car bombs exploded in the small village of Claudy on the 31st of July 1972. Today, a report from the police ombudsman said the police, the Catholic Church and the state conspired to cover up the suspected role of a priest in the bombings.
The youngest victim was 8-year-old Catherine Eakin, who was cleaning the windows of the family grocery store. The others who died were Joseph McCluskey, David Miller, James McClelland, William Temple, Elizabeth McElhinney, Rose McLaughlin, Patrick Connolly and Arthur Hone. No warnings were given, no group said they did it, and no one has ever been convicted of carrying out the bombings. But there's little doubt the IRA was responsible. The priest suspected of involvement, Father James Chesney, died 30 years ago. BBC Newsline's Julian O'Neill has been looking at the Ombudsman's report.
The Ombudsman's report casts light on a dark day, exposing a cover-up between church and state. 3 no-warning bombs in July 1972 killed 9 people and injured more than 30. This 8-year investigation by the Ombudsman found no evidence that the bombings themselves could have been prevented. Investigators re-examined old police files, and what they revealed was evidence held by the RUC that they believed Father James Chesney was the IRA's Director of Operations in South Derry, allegedly responsible for bombings and other incidents. But the priest was never questioned and the investigation compromised. The Ombudsman's office spoke to a former Special Branch detective who had wanted Father Chesney arrested, but the move was blocked by his boss, the Assistant Chief Constable. The ACC had written to the Northern Ireland office wondering what action to take, only to be told that the then Secretary of State Willie Whitelaw had already met Cardinal William Conway to discuss the possibility of transferring Father Chesney to Donegal. The Ombudsman came to Claudy with his findings, telling families of the deal which relocated Father Chesney in 1973.
Their motivations will never be known, and whether or not lives were saved or whether or not this was a proper course of action really will be a matter for others to debate. But it really does, on the part of church and state, come down to the rightness and the morality of the decisions they took, not a matter of criminality.
For the families, the report did not bring closure, but prompted many questions.
When I heard that Father Chesney continued his IRA activities after he was moved to Donegal, that's an absolute disgrace. If he had been arrested and due process had taken place, people would have lived in this country, they wouldn't be injured, families wouldn't have lost people. It's an absolute outrage.
Brendan O'Neill lost his aunt in the bombings. He says today shows just how flawed the initial investigation had been.
Well, I think that, that the RUC had, that I think they didn't properly investigate this for whatever reason between the Catholic Church and the government with that. But I think the RUC should have had some more people to come for questioning.
Mass was said in the local Catholic Church, led by a bishop shocked at a priest's alleged role in the IRA.
To find that a priest was alleged to have been an active member in that movement is certainly of great shame and disappointment and annoyance to the Church.
It would appear, because of his calling and his occupation, every step was taken to ensure that he didn't face trial, rather than that he did. And the first port of call should have been a judge, jury and a prosecution.
One theory for the cover-up is that the arrest of a priest could have inflamed violence. Father Chesney had always denied involvement in any IRA activity to his fellow clergy. He died in 1980, perhaps taking with him Claudy's chance for justice. Julian O'Neill, BBC Newsline, Claudy.
Meanwhile, the Secretary of State has told the families of the victims that the government is profoundly sorry that Father Chesney was not properly investigated. Owen Patterson stressed, though, the incident could not be viewed in isolation of what was going on elsewhere at the time. He also questioned the family's call for a fresh inquiry.
What worries me now about these calls for inquiry is that the key players, tragically, are now dead. I'm not quite sure who would be interrogated by this inquiry. There is one group of people who could perhaps come forward, and they must not be forgotten today with all this concentration on mistakes and wrongdoing perhaps by the government, and that is the paramilitaries. There may be people alive today who were involved in paramilitarism. This was not a one-man band that set off 3 bombs in Claudy and murdered 5 Catholics and 4 Protestants. Now perhaps they could come forward with information which could bring some relief to the families.
A former Bishop of Derry says he had no idea of Father Chesney's involvement in the South Derry Brigade of the IRA. Bishop Edward Daly interviewed the priest about allegations that he was an active member and was told that he was only a verbal Republican. The bishop says he has difficulty accepting the police ombudsman's conclusions.
I formulate my view from my interviews of the man, of my memories of the individual, and whilst I acknowledge that he was a very strong supporter of the Republican movement, I still have great difficulties in accepting that he was actively involved in any paramilitary activity.
Sinn Féin say the deaths in Claudy were wrong and should not have happened, but that there's no evidence the IRA was responsible. The party's spokesperson on Truth, Francie Malloy, says what is required is an independent international truth commission in which all those involved in the conflict could take part.
The allegations are made that Father Chesney was involved in the IRA. I don't know. I didn't know Father Chesney, so I don't know the involvement, or I don't know who was involved in the IRA in Derry at that particular time. So we have a situation here now where allegations have been made. The Father Chesney is dead. A number of the people who are involved at that particular time are also deceased. But our first thoughts obviously have to be with the families who are looking for justice, and that's why we are calling for an international tribunal of inquiry to bring about the justice and truth for the families of all the victims.
In a statement this afternoon, the PSNI said they recognised that opportunities to arrest and interview all of the suspects were not taken in 1972. They said they accepted that more could and should have been done, and they point out that the investigation is now under the remit of the Historical Inquiries team. A former RUC officer, who was a young constable at the time, says the level of violence was so high then that the truth could have plunged Northern Ireland into civil war.
The investigating officers would have been to some extent betrayed by the decision of the senior officers, as were the families of the dead who didn't achieve justice. But at the same time, I certainly can understand the context in which that decision was made, because there was a very real fear of civil war, and this would have been absolutely incendiary information to put into the mix.